Ancient Rome is often remembered as one of the most powerful and advanced civilizations in human history, an empire built on military discipline, political ambition, and engineering brilliance that shaped the foundations of the modern Western world. Its roads connected continents, its armies conquered vast territories, and its architecture still stands as a symbol of power thousands of years later. But behind the glory and achievements that history celebrates, there existed another Rome, one rarely discussed in school books. A Rome built not only on victories, but on suffering, inequality, and survival. Life in ancient Rome depended almost entirely on where you were born. For the wealthy elite, Rome could feel like the center of the world. They lived in luxurious villas filled with marble statues, decorative fountains, heated floors, and private gardens. Some even had personal bathhouses and libraries. Their days were filled with political meetings, social gatherings, and extravagant feasts where rare foods from across the empire was served. Flamingo tongues, exotic fish, and imported spices were considered status symbols among the rich. But this life of comfort represented only a very small percentage of Roman society. For the majority of Romans, daily life was unstable and often dangerous. Most ordinary citizens lived in large, overcrowded apartment buildings known as insulae, structures that could rise several floors high, but were often built quickly and cheaply by landlords seeking profit. The lower floors were usually safer and occupied by those who could afford slightly better living conditions, while the upper floors were reserved for the poor, where the risk of collapse, fire, and crime was much higher. Fire was one of the greatest threats in Rome. With no modern firefighting systems, a single accident could turn into a city-wide disaster. Entire neighborhoods could disappear overnight. Some historians believe that many landlords even locked exits to prevent tenants from leaving without paying rent, trapping people inside burning buildings. Survival sometimes depended not on wealth or strength, but simply on luck. Sanitation was another hidden problem rarely mentioned when discussing Roman greatness. Although Rome is famous for its aqueducts and advanced water systems, access to clean water was not equal. Wealthy homes had private plumbing, but the poor depended on shared fountains and public water sources. Streets were often filled with waste, food remains, and animal carcasses. Disease spread quickly in these crowded conditions, and epidemics were not uncommon. Perhaps the clearest example of Rome's harsh reality was its dependence on slavery. Slavery was not just part of Roman society. It was one of its main economic engines. Historians estimate that at certain times, nearly 1 out of every 3 people in Rome may have been enslaved. These individuals had no legal rights and were considered property under Roman law. Some slaves worked inside homes as cooks, teachers, or assistants, and a few developed close relationships with their masters. But many others faced brutal labor, especially those sent to agricultural estates or mines. Mining slaves, in particular, lived some of the shortest lives in the empire. They worked in dark tunnels filled with dust and toxic air, often chained to prevent escape. Exhaustion, injury, and illness were constant companions. Many historians believe that being sent to the mines was considered a slow death sentence rather than a job. Yet Roman society also created a strange contradiction. While slaves had no freedom, some could eventually earn it. A slave who proved loyal or useful might be granted freedom and become what Romans called a freedman. However, even after gaining freedom, social barriers remained. Roman society had a long memory, and former slaves rarely reached the same status as those born free. This complex and unequal system allowed Rome to expand rapidly, but it also created a culture where violence became normalized. Public punishments were common. Power was maintained through fear, and nowhere was this more visible than in Rome's most famous form of entertainment, the gladiator games. To the Roman public, these games were more than just sport. They were demonstrations of power, discipline, and control. But for the men who fought in the arena, they represented something far more personal: the constant reality that survival was never guaranteed. To the people of Rome, gladiators were symbols of strength and courage, figures who stood between life and death in front of thousands of cheering spectators. But the truth behind their lives was far more complex and often far more tragic than the stories told in popular culture. Most gladiators were not volunteers. Many were slaves, captured soldiers, or criminals sentenced to fight as punishment. Some were even prisoners taken from Rome's many wars of expansion, forced to fight not for honor, but simply to survive another day. However, what many people do not realize is that a small number of gladiators actually chose this life voluntarily. These men were known as auctorati, free citizens who signed contracts to become gladiators, often because they were in debt or seeking fame and fortune. But once they entered this world, their freedom became extremely limited. Gladiators lived and trained inside special schools known as ludi. These were not simple training camps. They were highly organized institutions run almost like military academies. Gladiators followed strict schedules, intense physical training, and controlled diets. Discipline was absolute. Trainers, known as lanistae, could be harsh and unforgiving. Punishments for disobedience could include beatings, isolation, or worse. One of the least known facts about gladiators is the oath they were required to take. This oath revealed the true nature of their profession. They were required to swear that they would endure being burned, chained, beaten, and killed by the sword if necessary. This was not symbolic language. It was a literal acceptance of the risks they faced. Despite this brutality, gladiators were considered valuable property. Training a skilled fighter required time, food, medical care, and resources. Because of this investment, owners did not want their fighters to die unnecessarily. Contrary to popular belief, many gladiator fights did not end in death. Skilled fighters could survive many matches and even become famous. In fact, some gladiators became the celebrities of their time. Graffiti discovered in ancient Roman cities shows that fans supported specific fighters, sometimes even writing messages praising their victories. Some women were known to admire successful gladiators in much the same way modern celebrities attract attention. Their popularity could bring gifts, money, and sometimes even political attention. Another surprising detail rarely discussed is the medical care gladiators received. Archaeological evidence suggests that some gladiator schools had their own doctors who specialized in treating combat injuries. These doctors developed early surgical techniques and treatment methods because keeping a fighter alive meant protecting an expensive investment. Even their diets were carefully designed. Many gladiators ate meals rich in barley and beans to increase body mass. This extra fat layer may have helped protect them from deep wounds. Because of this diet, some Romans jokingly referred to them as hordearii, meaning barley men. The arena itself was also far more complex than most people imagine. Beneath the Colosseum existed a hidden underground system known as the Hypogeum, a network of tunnels, cages, lifts, and trapdoors. Animals, fighters, and stage machinery were kept below the arena floor. Using elevators powered by slaves, animals could suddenly appear in the arena, surprising both fighters and spectators. This underground system functioned almost like a stage production, turning violence into a carefully organized performance. Perhaps even more surprising is the existence of female gladiators. Although rare, historical records and archaeological findings confirm that some women also fought in Roman arenas. These female fighters were considered exotic attractions and were sometimes used to create even greater spectacle for the crowds. Their existence challenges the common belief that gladiator combat was exclusively male. Yet despite the fame and occasional rewards, the psychological pressure on gladiators must have been immense. Every fight carried uncertainty. Every victory only guaranteed temporary survival. Many historians believe that gladiators formed strong bonds with each other, understanding that only those inside the arena truly understood their reality. Because in the end, no matter how skilled they became, every gladiator understood one simple truth: sooner or later, their luck could run out. While gladiator fights became the most famous form of Roman entertainment, they were only one part of a much darker culture of public violence that existed throughout the empire. The arena was not only a place for competition, it was also a place where Rome demonstrated power through fear. Public executions were often part of the games. Criminals sentenced to death were sometimes forced into the arena without armor or proper training. Some were made to fight wild animals. Others were placed into staged mythological reenactments where their deaths became part of theatrical performances. For the audience, this was spectacle. For those inside the arena, it was simply a delayed execution. One of the lesser-known aspects of these events is how carefully they were organized. Roman authorities understood the psychological effect of these spectacles. Violence was not random. It was controlled, structured, and used as a message. Rome was showing its citizens what happened to those who broke its laws or challenged its authority. This culture of fear extended far beyond the arena. Roman politics itself could be just as dangerous as combat. Power struggles between senators, generals, and emperors often ended in betrayal. Assassinations were not unusual. Conspiracies were common. Trust was rare. Some emperors became infamous not just for their leadership, but for their unpredictability. Caligula, for example, has been described by ancient historians as a ruler whose behavior became increasingly unstable. Stories describe extravagant spending, cruel punishments, and decisions that shocked even Roman elites. While some historical accounts may be exaggerated, there is little doubt that absolute power in Rome often created dangerous rulers. Nero remains another controversial figure. Remembered for his artistic ambitions and obsession with legacy, he ruled during one of Rome's most famous disasters, the Great Fire of Rome. While historians still debate his responsibility, his reign became associated with political executions and growing instability. These rulers reveal another hidden truth about Rome. The empire was not only maintained by strength, it was maintained by control, and sometimes fear. Roman punishments themselves could also be severe. Crucifixion, now remembered mostly through religious history, was originally a Roman method of execution designed to be both painful and public. It was intended not just to kill, but to warn. Other punishments included forced labor, exile or damnatio ad bestias, execution by wild animals in the arena. These punishments reinforced the idea that Rome's authority was absolute. Yet despite all this brutality, Rome continued to expand for centuries. Its military discipline, legal systems, and engineering achievements helped it dominate much of the known world. But like many great empires, Rome eventually began to face pressures it could not fully control. Economic problems grew, political instability increased, military threats became harder to contain. Historians still debate the exact reasons for Rome's decline, but most agree that no empire, no matter how powerful, can expand forever without consequences. And yet, even after its fall, Rome never truly disappeared. Its ideas survived, its laws influenced modern systems, its architecture shaped cities. Its stories still fascinate us today. But perhaps what makes Rome most fascinating is not just its power, but its contradictions. An empire capable of incredible innovation, yet built on inequality. A civilization that valued discipline, yet normalized violence. A society that created greatness, while demanding sacrifice. Because behind every great empire, there are always two stories. The story of power, and the story of the people who paid the price for it. Ancient Rome was not just a symbol of greatness, it was also a reminder that even the strongest civilizations are built on fragile foundations, and that history often remembers victories, while quietly forgetting the cost.